Chapter 1331. Yi Liangqiu couldn't help but ask, Mu Yun, if mommy leaves daddy one day. Xiao Mu Yun raised her little face and looked at her, staring straight at her. Yi Liangqiu couldn't ask anymore. She pursed her lips and said, forget it, mommy won't ask anymore. Little Mu Yun lay back down and patted her back. He coaxed her like an adult, Mommy, go to sleep. I'll watch mommy sleep. Yi Liangqiu found it funny, but she felt an indescribable warmth in her heart. After a while, she smiled gently and said, our Mu Yun is a warm little boy. Little Mu Yun's face was slightly red. He wasn't warm, he was cold to everyone. He only wanted to protect his mommy. However, the iceberg and warm little boy didn't expect that he would meet his little yellow bun later on. As long as he looked at that little yellow bun, his heart would melt and he would be willing to give her everything she liked. Yi Liangqiu fell asleep. She was in a deep sleep and Yi Mu Yun kept watching the time. At 9 o'clock in the evening, he secretly picked up his mommy's phone and sent a message to daddy. Mu Yun isn't feeling well. Come back soon. Liangqiu. After the little boy sent the message, he waited for a reply. He was a little hungry, so he found some food and fell asleep next to Yi Liangqiu. Meanwhile, in B City, Qin Anlan found Pei Chichi on the streets of B City. Originally, he was going to take her to the apartment before leaving. However, he received a message. He lowered his head and looked at the message for a long time. When he looked up at Pei Chichi again, his gaze was a little complicated. After a long time, he looked at Kaim and said calmly, Kaim, take Chichi to the apartment and call me when she arrives. Kaim's body trembled, and he subconsciously looked at Qin Anlan's phone. He probably realized something, but he couldn't believe that President Qin would really give up Pei Chichi for Yi Liangqiu. Startled for a moment, he finally nodded. I will. Qin Anlan walked slowly to Pei Chichi. Her long hair was a little messy because of the night wind. He reached out, straightened her hair, and pressed it. At this time, Pei Chichi also saw the hickey on his neck. She stared straight at him. His voice was a little hoarse. Chichi, stop looking. He loosened his grip in embarrassment. Give me a call when you get to the apartment. Be careful and don't run around. He paused for a moment before saying, I'll be back soon. Pei Chichi looked up at him. Her eyes were especially dazzling in the dark. He didn't dare to look at them. He looked down. Get in the car. I'll watch you leave. Pei Chichi nodded and took 2 steps back. They looked at each other in the night wind. Actually, they both knew that this was probably the last time they would be so close to each other. He had a woman, and she had also met a man who made her lose control. She didn't want to think about her past with Anlan, because he had been her family for the past 2 years. She didn't want to add all those unbearable things between them. She wanted him to be fine, and so did she. I'm fine, Anlan. She looked at him and smiled under the moonlight. I'm fine. She even spun around on the spot, looking relaxed and happy. Qin Anlan's gaze deepened. Chichi, do you know that the happier you are, the less I'm in your heart? Chapter 1332. Perhaps this was the main reason why they had never been able to be together. She didn't want to give it to him. It wasn't that she couldn't give it to him, but even though she had lost her memory, she still had that person in her heart. As long as she saw that person, everything would be released. She also had him in her heart, just the kind of family. He looked at her and sadly realized that he had actually given up. But he didn't have the courage to tell her. He stood in the night and watched her get into the car. His fingers clenched and he held his phone tightly. On it was the reason why he had to give up on Pei Chichi, and it also contained the last trace of softness in his heart. The car slowly drove past in front of him. His gaze was a little cold as he looked at the back of the car and pursed his lips. When the car was out of sight, he got into the car and sat in the back seat. He closed his eyes slightly. To the airport. The driver, old Zhong, was also an old member of the Qin family. He hesitated for a moment. Young master, do you want to go back and see old madam? Qin Anlan slowly opened his eyes and looked at old Zhong. No need, to the airport. Old Zhong shook his head and sighed in his heart. There was something he wanted to say, but in the end, he didn't say anything. When the car arrived at the airport, Qin Anlan's private plane was already ready. In less than 2 hours, they arrived at H-City. Sitting in the car and looking at the bustling night view of H-City, his heart was in turmoil. He had given up on Pei Chichi, King Entertainment, and his mother. Was it really just for Mu Yun? In such a quiet moment, he was willing to admit to himself that it wasn't like that. Mu Yun's illness wasn't acute, and he had clearly found out that Yi Liangqiu had 2 active blood banks. He really didn't need to be by Mu Yun's side all the time. So, who was he in such a hurry to return to H-City for? Perhaps he knew it in his heart, but he wasn't willing to admit it to himself. He wasn't willing to admit that a relationship that he had given up was engraved in his heart. The black limousine stopped at the entrance of the 5-star hotel. Qin Anlan opened the door and got out. He was dressed in black, looking a little bleak in the middle of the night. The phone in his hand rang. He took it. It was a call from Keim. President Qin, Miss Pei, is missing again. There was a hint of uneasiness in Keim's voice. But don't worry, President Qin. I will find Miss Pei. Qin Anlan raised his head and looked at the lights on the street. His lips twitched slightly. It was expected. Since he didn't say anything, Keim felt even more uneasy and didn't dare to make a sound. After a long time, Qin Anlan said faintly and hung up the phone. Perhaps, what should come could not be stopped, and what did not belong to him would never belong to him. He slowly walked inside, but in the lobby of the hotel, he met an unexpected person. Mom! Qin Anlan frowned slightly as he looked at the lady sitting on the sofa and Crispy Sleeve. Crispy Sleeve nodded at Qin Anlan, then helped Lady Qin up. Old Madam has just arrived too. She heard that young master had returned to B City and was wondering if she had missed him. I didn't expect young master to return. Qin Anlan looked at his mother, then looked around and said calmly, "Did you get a room?" Crispy Sleeve shook her head, her gaze meaningful. Qin Anlan saw the signal in her eyes and knew what was going on. Thus, he carried his luggage and asked for a suite from the front desk. Naturally, he wouldn't be on the same floor as Yi Liangqiu. In response, Lady Qin said slowly, "Are you afraid that I'll make things difficult for her?" Chapter 1333. Lady Qin looked at her son and was furious. However, she didn't want to lose face outside, so she snorted. "You knew that I would be angry?" Qin Anlan smiled and didn't reply. Soft Sleeve tried to smooth things over. "How long has it been since we last met? Mother and son, you two are so sarcastic. It's a joke. Are you an outsider?" Lady Qin's tone wasn't very good. Soft Sleeve knew that she was in a bad mood, so she didn't mind. She just looked at Qin Anlan again. This old lady has to be coaxed. After going to the suite, Soft Sleeve went to tidy up. Madam Qin and Qin Anlan sat in the study. It had been a long time since they had appeared in the study together in such a formal manner. Lady Qin sat upright and took a sip of the tea that Qin Anlan handed over. Then, she said lightly, "Why? You went to B City to comfort the little vixen, and now you're back to look for the vixen?" Women who were beautiful and could make her son fall head over heels for her were all vixens. As for that Pei Chichi, she didn't see her because she knew that it wouldn't be long. Her son had lived with her for so long, but he didn't even touch her. There was nothing to be afraid of. On the other hand, this Yi Liangqiu was very capable. Not only did she secretly give birth to Anlan's child, but she could also make Anlan let go of Pei Chichi. Lady Qin couldn't accept a woman like Yi Liangqiu. She couldn't in the past, and she definitely couldn't now. Such a woman was too scheming. No one in the Qin family would be able to control her. After hearing her words, Qin Anlan smiled bitterly. "Mom, your heart aches." Lady Qin sneered. "Let me ask you, is the one in B City or the one here in your heart?" Qin Anlan didn't think for too long and said slowly, "Mom, I have a son. Don't use your son as an excuse." Lady Qin's voice was a little stern. "Anlan, you know that our Qin family has run King Entertainment for so long, and it's an unwritten rule that we don't marry our own female artist. You used to know when to advance and when to retreat. Why can't you tell the difference now?" Qin Anlan sat down slowly and looked straight at his mother. So, what do you want me to do? Don't want Mu Yun? Should he just pretend that he didn't have a son? Really? Lady Qin looked at Qin Anlan. What do you think? What can a sick child do? Mom, you're too cruel. Qin Anlan wiped his face. When he looked at Lady Qin again, his eyes were firm. I will not abandon Mu Yun. He is my flesh and blood, my child. Lady Qin was furious. Yi Liangqiu gave birth to him with ulterior motives. She used him as a tool to threaten you into marrying her. She won't, Qin Anlan blurted out. Lady Qin was also a little cold. She won't tell you that you have a son 7 years later. Anlan, you didn't believe in women for a long time, did you? Mrs. Qin closed her eyes and said, love is the most important thing. Think about how your father treated me and my mother back then. Qin Anlan clenched his fists. He abandoned us and ran away with another woman. Lady Qin's voice had a touch of sternness. He comes from a small family, so he's never familiar with us. Have you forgotten that he ran away with all the company's money? Have you forgotten that I was managing a company that was about to close down and struggling? Of course, that heartless man was also dead. Liangqiu and he are different, Qin Anlan said with difficulty. Chapter 1334. Qin Anlan looked at his mother, his heart a little cold. Mom, you already knew about Mu Yun's existence a year ago, didn't you? Lady Qin's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it on her face. She only asked casually, did she tell you? Yes or no? Qin Anlan's tone was a little unyielding. Lady Qin was so angry that she almost fainted. At this moment, Soft Sleeve came over and tried to calm him down. No matter how angry young master is, you have to think about old madam's health. Qin Anlan pursed his lips slightly. After a long time, he said, Mom, let's not talk about this. I'll get someone to send you back tomorrow. Lady Qin caught her breath and glared at her son angrily. And then watch you and her fly away together. Anlan, are you trying to anger me to death? Qin Anlan was silent for a long time before he asked, Mom, do you love me? Of course. Lady Qin's tone softened and there was some warmth in her eyes. Qin Anlan looked at his mother and said softly, I love Mu Yun too. I love my child. Lady Qin knew that she had been tricked. Her face darkened and she didn't say anything. Soft Sleeve looked at one and then at the other and laughed. Look at the two of you. You're like children throwing a tantrum. I'll go make a cup of tea. You can drink it slowly and quarrel slowly. Soft Sleeve had been by Lady Qin's side for a long time. Lady Qin could hear the teasing tone in her words. Of course, she also reminded her, so she became much more sober. Her son was all grown up. Naturally, she couldn't go against him. If she forced him into a corner and Anlan left King Entertainment behind, she couldn't possibly let this old woman continue to manage the company. Lady Qin rejected it from the bottom of her heart. She still wanted to enjoy a few more years of happiness. Thinking of this, her expression also softened. She looked at her son and said, forget it, you go back first. As for me and Qingxiu, once we get sick of staying in H City, we'll naturally go back. Qin Anlan didn't leave immediately. He waited until Crispy Sleeve brewed the best tea and drank it with Lady Qin before leaving. He didn't blame Lady Qin for what happened to Mu Yun. He wasn't that irrational. At the end of the day, it was his own fault. His mother had her own standpoint. He didn't agree with her, but he had no right to blame her. However, when he went out, his heart was heavy. When he returned to the presidential suite on the top floor, he opened the door. The suite was dark. He shook his head and turned on the lights. It was quiet and there was no sound at all. He walked towards the master bedroom. His footsteps were very light, and he did not wake up the man and woman sleeping on the bed when he walked in. Yi Liangqiu was sleeping with her body curled up. Mu Yun was lying on her back like a weak animal. They were sleeping so soundly that he did not wake them even when he turned on the light. At this time, it was almost midnight. His whole body was exhausted and his heart was full of sorrow. He had given up 2 years of persistence just for this scene, and he had given up so easily. He walked in slowly and sat on the bed dejectedly. He reached out to stroke little Mu Yun's hair. The little guy was like a newborn calf, sending his head into his big palm. His heart couldn't help but soften. Suddenly, his gaze met Yi Liangqiu's. She had already woken up and was looking at him with her eyes wide open. Qin Anlan's voice was a little hoarse. "Slept for half a day," she grunted, her voice even more hoarse than his. He looked at her deeply for a while before taking off his jacket and opening the collar of his shirt. Chapter 1335. Qin Anlan paused and looked at her. Afraid? She didn't say anything. His lips curled into a cold smile. "Yi Liangqiu, I thought you weren't afraid of anything." She sat up slowly, looked down at little Mu Yun, and covered him with the quilt. "Is this how you usually take care of children?" Qin Anlan frowned. His tone was not pleasant, but his voice was soft. Yi Liangqiu looked at him, got out of bed, put on a robe, and tied the belt. "Your body seems to be better." He smiled and followed her out. "I'm a little hungry. Make me a midnight snack." She looked at him, didn't say anything, and went to the kitchen. She had lived here for a long time, and the kitchen utensils were complete, including fresh ingredients every day. She opened the fridge and took out a chicken breast, a few fresh shiitake mushrooms, and a small handful of vegetables. Qin Anlan frowned when he smelled it. "I don't eat shredded chicken noodles." He hated shredded chicken noodles the most. Because Tang Yu loved to eat it, and because Pei Chichi loved to cook it, he went from simply disliking it to hating it. Yi Liangqiu filled a bowl with it, brought it to the dining table, and placed it in front of her. Then, she began to eat in front of him. Qin Anlan was a little angry. "I'm hungry. I thought you didn't eat shredded chicken noodles." Her voice was very indifferent, and she glanced at him. "I like it now." He was cheeky. In fact, it smelled quite good. Yi Liangqiu blew on it, put the fat shiitake into her mouth, and said slowly after eating, "A man who goes to another woman is not qualified to make me cook." "Lin Xingyuan isn't he?" He was full of anger. Yi Liangqiu put down her chopsticks. "If you mention him again, get out of here." "Heartache." He looked at her mockingly. Yi Liangqiu stared at him for a while and suddenly said, "Yes, my heart hurts. However, it shouldn't be comparable to the pain you'll feel in B City today." He was a little angry. She was really not afraid of him at all. He stretched out his long arm and snatched the bowl from her hand. He lowered his head and took 2 bites from her bowl and chopsticks. He moved so quickly that it took her a while to react. "Qin Anlan, is it dirty?" As soon as he finished speaking, he let go of her hand and looked up at her with an unfathomable gaze. After a long time, he said slowly and shamelessly, "Don't talk about your saliva. I've even eaten yours before." Yi Liangqiu blushed and glared at him. "You've never seen it before? Still don't believe me? Do you want to try again?" His voice was very cold, and he spoke the most shameless words with a straight face. Yi Liangqiu ignored him and turned around to get another bowl of shredded chicken noodles. It was more seasoned than the previous bowl, and it was even more tempting. However, as soon as she served it, it was taken away by a certain shameless man. Then the bowl that they had both eaten was returned to her. "Qin Anlan, can you be any more shameless?" She pursed her lips. She only complained, and did not snatch it. Whoever tried to snatch it would be childish. Qin Anlan leaned against the back of the chair, his hands in front of him, and looked at the bowl with dissatisfaction. "Help me remove the vegetables. I'm not your mother." She lowered her head and ate her noodles. Chapter 1336. After a while, he said in a hoarse voice, "I don't like to eat vegetables." Yi Liangqiu put down her chopsticks and glared at him. It was a habit she hated because Mu Yun didn't like to eat them. "Hurry up and help me pick them out." He looked at her with a condescending look. Yi Liangqiu finally moved, but she didn't help him pick them out. Instead, she picked all the vegetables in her bowl and put them in his bowl. Didn't he not like to eat them? Then eat as much as you want. She didn't know that her action was almost childish, but it was a little cute in his eyes. Especially after the quarrel with his mother, Qin Anlan was in a bad mood and had been depressed. But now he was much happier. He looked at her and smiled. Finally, he reached out his chopsticks. For the first time, a person who had never eaten vegetables finished all the vegetables in his bowl. He frowned, just like Crayon Shin-chan. It was a little ugly, but it was cute. Yi Liangqiu picked the noodles and admired his look. She couldn't help smiling. Although it was just a little, he caught it. He was stunned. How long had it been since he saw her smile? Except on the big screen, he could only see her smile in his dreams. He looked straight at her smile, and she probably felt his gaze. Her smile froze on her lips and she lowered her head to eat the noodles. Everything was silent again. The atmosphere was a little stiff. He looked at her for a while and finally lowered his head to eat his noodles. He didn't like chicken shredded noodles, but he could eat it now. It was probably because he was hungry. When Yi Liangqiu was cleaning the bowl, his fingers touched her hand. "Let me do it." She looked up into his eyes. At the same time, her hand trembled. So did he. He hesitated to move his hand away, but in the end, he didn't. At the same time, they thought of the time when they were in the apartment. Sometimes, after they finished eating, she actually dared to let him do the dishes. Now, he was used to it. They looked at each other for a long time. Yi Liangqiu said softly, "No need." She broke away from his hand and began to clean up the dishes. Then, she washed them in the sink. She did all this elegantly, and was very different from the young girl who was busy in the kitchen. Qin Anlan looked at her back and suddenly asked, "Liangqiu, can't you go back?" Her back stiffened. Then, she washed her hands for about 5 minutes before picking up a napkin to dry her hands. Her voice drifted over slowly. "You didn't cherish the past, so why should I be reluctant to part with it?" She turned her head and looked straight at him. "Qin Anlan, I wanted to give birth to this child myself. It has nothing to do with you. If it weren't for your mother dealing with Xingyuan, I wouldn't have let Mu Yun appear in front of you. Are you showing your cards now?" He frowned and looked at her. "You think you've achieved your goal, so you're done using me, right?" He walked forward slowly, step by step, trapping her by the sink. His voice was a little gloomy. "Do you think you've completed Tang Yu's task? It's none of your business." She gritted her teeth. "It's not good for a woman to be so stubborn," he said coldly. "Yi Liangqiu, do you dare to say that you don't like me? If you don't like me, why are you still willing to sleep with me?" He pinched her chin and looked from her eyebrows to her nose, and then to her lips. Chapter 1337. He saw the ring on her neck again. It was eye-catching and glaring. His fingers paused and his voice was cold. "Did you go down to look for it?" "Yes." She didn't hide it. The cleaner found it and returned it to her. He looked at her clothes and suddenly smirked. "I thought you couldn't move your legs. Turns out you still have strength. Qin Anlan, you can be more shameless." She was embarrassed and wanted to slap his handsome face. He caught her hand and held her wrist with his strong fingers. "You have to change this bad habit." She glared at him. "I don't have to change for you." He looked at her for a long time. Suddenly, he leaned over and kissed her lips. He saw that she wanted to struggle, so he quickly pinned her hands behind her back. She was leaning against the sink and her body moved forward as if she was sending herself to him. Yi Liangqiu was extremely embarrassed. "What are you trying to do?" He leaned against her and let go of her hands. "Yi Liangqiu, you can hit me as much as you want now, but I can't guarantee the consequences." She leaned back and stared at him in surprise. But she still tried to slap him. It was a light slap. Qin Anlan glared at her. "You have guts." With that, he leaned forward and kissed her lips. He tasted the shiitake mushroom and she tasted the faint taste of tobacco in his mouth. She was shocked and immediately reached out to hit him. But the harder she hit, the harder he kissed. Their lips and teeth intertwined. He was so hot that Yi Liangqiu felt that a layer of her lips had been rubbed off. After a long time, he finally let go of her lips and looked at her deeply. She had responded just now. Both of them were panting a little, especially her lips which were glistening. It was very embarrassing. She instinctively licked it. He looked at it and his eyes deepened. His Adam's apple unconsciously moved a little. Then he moved closer, his face very close to hers, and his voice was extremely hoarse. "I'll kiss you every time you hit me." Yi Liangqiu hit his handsome face again, but his face was like an iron wall. Even after being hit, it didn't move at all. He directly pressed his lips against hers, making everything that had been in his mind come true. His lips moved downwards and he bit down on her neck. She almost jumped up in shock. Then, she tilted her head and bit his neck. Qin Anlan raised his eyes slightly, looked at her, and then let go. When he let go, she let go too. However, he did not leave her neck. Instead, he slowly sucked out a horrifying kiss mark. It was green and purple. After a long time, he loosened his lips and said in a hoarse voice, "This is a mark." Yi Liangqiu was stunned and looked at him. Qin Anlan tilted his head and looked at her. Again. She ignored him and directly pushed him away. "You're crazy." Although she was scolding him, her ears turned red. Qin Anlan took 2 steps back, turned around, and walked into the living room. Yi Liangqiu followed behind him. "Where's my necklace?" He suddenly turned around and stared at her, staring straight at her. Her heart was beating wildly, but she forced herself to look at him. "I threw it away," he said as he walked towards the bathroom. Yi Liangqiu hurriedly followed behind him. When he reached the door, he paused for a moment and she fell straight onto his back. Chapter 1338. You throw yourself into my arms and miss someone else at the same time. His voice was cold. "Yi Liangqiu, you are really promising." She stood up straight and stretched out her hand. "Give it back to me." He lowered his eyes and looked at her white palms. She was tall, so her palms were naturally beautiful and fair. "No." His voice was stiff. But then he thought of Su Xiu's words. They were also like 2 children. The fiercer they fought, the more they cared. He should care. Seeing her wearing the ring given by another man, he actually felt very uncomfortable. This kind of discomfort was more than the Tang Yu in Pei Chichi's heart. At least, he had endured Pei Chichi for 2 years. If there were no accidents, he could endure it for the rest of his life. But Yi Liangqiu, he couldn't. He attributed this couldn't to the fact that she gave birth to a child for him, self-deceiving straight man cancer. His hand loosened, and the necklace with the ring fell into the toilet. Then, there was a sound of water. "It's washed away." He smiled at her. "So there's no need to think about it anymore." Yi Liangqiu looked at him and turned around. "Qin Anlan, you are childish." When he couldn't see her, she smiled lightly. Would he die of anger tomorrow? Qin Anlan looked at her back and went forward to hug her waist from behind. He put his face on her shoulder. "He is not childish." His hot breath was on the side of her neck. Yi Liangqiu couldn't stand it, but she still said stubbornly, "It's not easy to compare." He let go of her immediately, and his face was a little dark. Did she really want to compare? Qin Anlan took off his bathrobe and slept in the second bedroom. He seemed to be in a bad mood. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, he actually fell asleep. Because she was next door. The next morning, when he woke up, he was licked. He reached out and touched it. It was a furry little head. Qin Anlan opened his eyes and saw little Mu Yun. "Morning." His voice was a little hoarse as he kissed the little head in his arms. Little Mu Yun's face was a little red. He raised his head and said, "Mommy made breakfast. Daddy is up." Qin Anlan rarely slept so soundly. He lay flat and looked at the sky outside. He grabbed the watch on the bedside table and looked at the time. It was almost 9 o'clock. He sat up, stretched his body, and picked up the lamb with one hand. "Wash your face and brush your teeth with Daddy." Little Mu Yun's face was still slightly red, but he didn't refuse. An adult and a child stood together in the bathroom brushing their teeth, looking quite loving. When Yi Liangqiu stood at the door, her eyes were filled with tears. At this moment, she felt sorry for Mu Yun, for the past, for the present, for the future. Her tone was very indifferent. "Breakfast." Qin Anlan tilted his head and looked at her. "I'll be done in a while." He looked at her a little longer and found that she usually liked to wear long dresses at home. She was quite feminine. He smiled and reached out to take off his bathrobe. When he walked into the changing room, he realized that he hadn't packed his luggage. But when he opened the cabinet, his clothes were already neatly hung. Each of them had the faint scent of his favorite detergent. He took out a set of clothes and put them on. When he walked out, little Mu Yun was already sitting at the dining table. Yi Liangqiu was helping him eat breakfast. The morning light shone on her face, making her look gentle and beautiful. Even her hair was hazy. Chapter 1339. There was nothing in front of him. Chinese breakfast. President Qin might not like it, but you can call for customer service. Yi Liangqiu sat down and had breakfast with little Mu Yun. Qin Anlan looked at the food in front of them and frowned. Are you sure you want to call me President Qin in front of Mu Yun? Yi Liangqiu glanced at him and didn't say anything else. Qin Anlan reached out and took the bowl from her hands, as well as 2 small plates of side dishes, and began to eat just like that. Daddy, don't you think it's dirty? Little Mu Yun said seriously. Mommy said saliva can spread a lot of germs. Qin Anlan raised an eyebrow and looked at Yi Liangqiu. You said that? Yi Liangqiu glared at him. I said that. Then we've kissed so many times. Why didn't you think you were dirty? And... He stopped. She immediately covered his mouth. Don't talk nonsense. You told me not to mess around last night, and now you're telling me not to talk nonsense. He smiled and pushed her hand away. Liangqiu, don't mess around. Let me eat properly. Huh? She put down her hand angrily and glared at him. But he smiled. That's it. She went to get a bowl of food. When she was eating, they started arguing again. Little Mu Yun looked at them and felt that they hadn't grown up yet. Qin Anlan finished his breakfast and said calmly, there will be a meeting at King Entertainment this afternoon. I'll leave in a bit and be back around 8 p.m. Although his tone was calm, Yi Liangqiu was a little stunned. She looked at him for a long time before saying, you didn't have to come back last night. He was already full and looked straight at her. I told Mu Yun that I would come back. Just because of this. Her heart skipped a beat. She had to admit that although he was a jerk, he was a good father. There's no need to be touched. Qin Anlan wiped his lips and got up. He touched little Mu Yun's head and said in a low voice, Daddy will be back tonight. Little Mu Yun said, then Daddy has to rest well. Qin Anlan smiled. This child. How obedient. He lifted his gaze and looked at Yi Liangqiu. She blushed and turned her face away uncomfortably. He smiled and got up to change into a more formal suit. Yi Liangqiu followed him and stood at the entrance of the changing room. Is the situation at King Entertainment still not good? He took out his jacket and put it on, looking straight at her. Do you think King Entertainment is in trouble because of Tang Yu? She didn't say anything, which meant that she agreed. Qin Anlan lowered his eyes and smiled. After a while, he said, Tang Yu has no interest in the entertainment industry. She looked at him and wanted to ask more, but he slowly walked in front of her and placed his long index finger on her lips. His voice was very light. Don't ask too much. Otherwise, I'll think that you care about me. What if I do? She still looked at him very calmly, but she said the words that tugged at his heartstrings. Qin Anlan's body trembled. He looked at her. After a long while, he smiled slightly and rubbed his finger lightly on her lips. He didn't say anything. When he left, her body felt a little weak, something seemed different. He didn't say anything, but she could feel the change in his heart. Qin Anlan left the suite but didn't leave immediately. Instead, he went to greet Lady Qin. Chapter 1340. Qin Anlan touched his nose. Just now, Liangqiu called me President Qin. Now, Mom, you should call me that too. He was in a bad situation now. Everyone hated him. You deserve it. Lady Qin put away her things and looked at her son. After a while, she said softly, do you have something important to do? Qin Anlan pursed his lips. Mom, I think you know the current situation of King Entertainment. Lady Qin's gaze also sharpened. She sneered. So now is the best way to unite with ATV by marriage. When she said that, Qin Anlan shook his head. Mom, why are you so muddled? Mr. Su is someone who eats people without spitting out the bones. Do you think I can stop his ambition after marrying Su Cheng? At least, you can delay it and ease it. Lady Qin's tone was a little cruel. Anlan, sacrificing Su Cheng is nothing for King Entertainment. She paused. Anyway, you have Yi Liangqiu. In the future, even if you don't want to touch Su Cheng, it's fine. You just have to get along on the surface. The reason why Lady Qin said this was because she knew that Su Cheng was gay. Su Cheng wouldn't like Anlan, and Anlan naturally wouldn't like her either. Qin Anlan smiled. Mom, do you think Mr. Su will still marry Su Cheng to me now? What we think is also what he thinks. Lady Qin's eyes were scheming. This is the time to compete in patience. Qin Anlan said without thinking, I won't put Mu Yun and Yi Liangqiu in that kind of unbearable situation. She is now. Lady Qin's voice was extremely stern. Have you forgotten your relationship with Pei Chichi? Qin Anlan clenched his fists and said in a depressed voice, I will dissolve the marriage with Chichi. Lady Qin's eyes were a little horrified. Anlan, you're crazy. This is a life-saving straw for you and King Entertainment. You should know when to use it. Mom, if everything in my life is used to calculate, then what's the point of living? Qin Anlan forced a smile. That's it. I'll take care of my personal affairs. He turned around and left. Lady Qin was furious. Crisp Xiu rushed over and patted her chest, coaxing, all right, old mistress, young master has grown up and has his own ideas. You see, he already has a son. Naturally, he wouldn't want to lose the prestige of a father in front of his son. This time, you should let the young master solve these troublesome matters by himself. Just enjoy your life. There was a touch of sorrow in Lady Qin's eyes. Of course I want to, but Crisp Xiu, Anlan wasn't like this in the past. In the past, Anlan would do anything to achieve his goals, but now, what had he changed? Milky White Sleeve sighed, young master is probably lonely. He needs people to understand him. Lonely? Lady Qin was stunned for a moment. She was in a daze for a long time before she smiled. Then what about my loneliness? Crisp Xiu, look at that Yi Liangqiu. She's so cold and doesn't have a trace of humanity in her. Can she bring happiness to Anlan? Old mistress, it's fine as long as young master likes her. Crisp Xiu patted her on the back. Be good, don't be crazy. Lady Qin seemed to be holding her breath. After a while, she finally relaxed. I feel terrible in my heart. There's only that vixen and that little bastard in Anlan's heart. Chapter 1341. Young master looks like a smart child. Besides, didn't you check it out? It's not a life-threatening disease. He'll be fine when he grows up. Soft Sleeve paused. I heard that if you have another child with this disease, you can use stem cells from the umbilical cord to transplant it. That way, he'll be fine. Lady Qin's gaze was a little hesitant. Finally, she sighed. Let him be. Soft Sleeve finally let out a sigh of relief. However, Lady Qin muttered, look at that woman. She didn't even come here to see me. She really doesn't care about an old thing like me. Missy doesn't know that the old lady is here either. Soft Sleeve seemed to be coaxing a child. If the old lady wants to see her grandson, we can go and see him another day. Another day? I'm already going back to B City tomorrow. The old lady's temper flared up again. Soft Sleeve laughed in her heart, but her words couldn't be more serious. All right, then we'll go and see him later. The old lady was unhappy again. If you want to go, you go. I won't go. After saying that, she started chanting Buddhist scriptures again. Soft Sleeve sighed. The old lady still disliked Miss Yi's low family status. While she was thinking that, Lady Qin had already spoken again. Her family status is a little low, but what I don't like about her is that she's too scheming. Anlan can't catch her at all. Soft Sleeve didn't say anything. Miss Yi was indeed not easy to deal with. In the end, she still didn't see him. Lady Qin returned to B City in the afternoon. She really didn't trust Anlan to fight with that old fox of the Su family, In B City, Qin Anlan sat in the back seat of the car, looking down at the documents. After a while, he said indifferently, "Kaim, what do you think Mr. Su's intention is this time?" Kaim was a little emotional. "It's obviously a trap." Qin Anlan put down the documents in his hand, his gaze unfathomable. "He always likes to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger. You'll know if he still doesn't want to shed all pretense of cordiality." Kaim pursed her lips. Will President Qin really accept his proposal? In today's meeting, Mr. Su hinted at the marriage between the two families. Qin Anlan's fingers were on the document, and after a long time, he said softly, "In the end, Su Cheng is not their biological daughter. If she was, do you think they would be willing to sacrifice her?" He thought of his mother's words and couldn't help but sigh at Su Cheng. They were raised like kittens and puppies to relieve boredom. When it was time to make use of them, they wouldn't be soft-hearted at all. Kaim nodded. Yes, they have never given up looking for their biological daughter. Su Cheng is just a stepping stone. He paused for a moment, then looked at Qin Anlan. Then why didn't President Qin reject it? "I can't let Mr. Su know the importance of Liangqiu and Mu Yun to me. I'll deal with it first," Qin Anlan said and closed his eyes. Kaim didn't say anything for a long time. Qin Anlan opened his eyes and realized what he had said. He paused and looked at Kaim. "Don't talk nonsense." Kaim held back his laughter. "Got it, President Qin. From now on, don't call me President Qin." Qin Anlan was hard to please today. Kaim was stunned. "Then what should I call you?" Qin Anlan snorted. "Forget it." Kaim felt that President Qin was very awkward. He was a little worried. Was it menopause? But President Qin was only in his early 30s. It shouldn't be. But then he thought about it. Wasn't a man in love like this? Qin Anlan, on the other hand, couldn't calm down. He cared about Yi Liangqiu not only because of Mu Yun, but also because he hadn't forgotten her all these years. Chapter 1342. Seeing him like this, Kaim didn't say anything. Qin Anlan closed his eyes to rest. They were on the way to the B City airport. At 5 in the afternoon, there was a traffic jam on the road. The car started and stopped. Suddenly, the driver's voice turned serious. "President Qin, the brakes don't seem to be working." Qin Anlan opened his eyes. The car wasn't going fast, but they were on the road and could be in danger at any time. "I just sent it for maintenance 2 days ago." The driver's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes focused on the road ahead. His entire body was tense. Qin Anlan frowned, his lips pressed into a straight line. "Drive out and try not to hit other cars. Pick a green belt and stop the car." The driver was hesitant. His forehead was covered in sweat, and so was his back. Even if he stopped the car at this speed, he couldn't be sure if he would get hurt. But there was no other way. After looking left and right for a while, he finally picked a direction and drove straight in that direction. He instinctively stepped on the brakes, but the brakes gave way. The car lost control and crashed into the green belt with a loud bang. The car tilted forward, lifted up, and then retreated. The wheels spun a few times before it came to a stop. The hood was smoking, and the crash was unrecognizable. Qin Anlan's body also suddenly leaned forward. After an intense collision, he finally steadied himself with great difficulty. He took a deep breath and moved his body. "Feeling fine," he said slowly, "just say that I'm injured." Kaim understood and nodded. "Yes, I got it." Qin Anlan held his forehead. This has something to do with Mr. Su. That was why he never thought that marrying Su Cheng would change anything. An hour later, Qin Anlan arrived at Shengyuan Hospital's emergency room. The media rushed over like sharks that smelled blood. They surrounded Shengyuan Hospital and reported on King Entertainment's president Qin Anlan's car accident. Kaim stood in the VIP ward, his tone solemn. "President Qin, we have indeed found out that Mr. Su is secretly buying shares of King Entertainment. But from the looks of it, King Entertainment's foundation has not been shaken. He can only make a small fuss and won't be able to change anything." Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at an unknown place in front of him. He sneered, He finally couldn't help it. Kaim couldn't help but say, President Chin, in the past, Mr. Su was just sticking to his own pattern. After all, ATV is enough for him to gain a foothold in the entertainment industry, and he has always had a good relationship with the Chin family. Chin Anlan looked at Kaim and said slowly, Do you know why my father abandoned his wife and son? Kaim froze for a moment. She didn't expect that President Chin would say such a private thing to her. And does this have anything to do with Mr. Su? Chin Anlan said slowly, That woman was my father's first love. She left for so many years, but she suddenly came back. Could it be a coincidence? He had checked. Everything had been arranged by Mr. Su. And he didn't tell his mother about this. The past couldn't be changed, so why add to the sadness? Back then, when his father left, he took away a lot of money. At that time, Mr. Su wanted to buy King Entertainment in the name of helping, but his mother didn't agree. All these years, Mr. Su hadn't given up. Chin Anlan also had to settle this score with him. Settle it later, settle it early, settle it all together. Chapter 1343. Chin Anlan nodded. After a pause, he said, Spread the news that I have a concussion and may have to be hospitalized for a week. Kaim was a little surprised. After a long time, he said hesitantly, But President Chin, this will definitely cause King Entertainment's shares to plummet. Then buy back a lot. Chin Anlan's gaze was a little distant. Do it secretly. Don't let Mr. Su find out. Also, break through the normal ATV. He wouldn't sit back and wait. He would definitely fight back. Kaim nodded. Mr. Su will definitely propose marriage again. Chin Anlan's gaze was a little unfathomable. He picked up the document beside him and said, This is for my mother. Kaim took it. Before he left, he still said, President Chin, should we inform Miss Yi about your injury? Actually, it wasn't a serious injury. It was just a slight sprain in his arm. However, Kaim felt that this was the best time to sublimate their relationship. Chin Anlan glanced at him and said in a low voice, Do you think it's appropriate for her to come at this juncture? Kaim was rebuffed and didn't say anything. Chin Anlan's voice softened. Give me the phone. Kaim nodded and handed the phone to him. Chin Anlan wanted to make a call, but he found that Kaim was still standing there. He curled his lips. What are you still standing there for? Kaim touched his nose and left. When there was only Chin Anlan in the ward, he looked at the phone and slid his fingers across it. He didn't make the call for a long time. 5 minutes later, he made the call. Yi Liangqiu picked up the phone. Her voice was warm and soothing. Chin Anlan's impetuous mood calmed down a lot. His voice was low and slow. I won't be coming back tonight. Oh. She only said one word to him. Chin Anlan snorted. You sure are a man of few words. Yi Liangqiu, are you also like this when facing Lin Xingyuan? President Chin, when you're facing Pei Chichi, you're also much gentler than when you're facing me. She suddenly became very harsh. Chin Anlan reached for the water beside him and was about to drink, but he spat it all out. He frowned and looked at her. Yi Liangqiu, can you be more gentle? When I face President Chin, I can't think of these 2 words. Her tone was a little awkward. Chin Anlan looked out the window and watched as the dark night slowly descended. Then, he listened to her awkward little feelings, and even his heart softened a little. Liangqiu, I'll go back in a few days. In a few days. She caught the meaning behind his words and bit her lip. After a long time, she finally asked, Chin Anlan, did something happen to you? You care about me? He asked naturally. Yi Liangqiu snorted coldly. In your dreams. Yi Liangqiu, nothing happened to me. It's just that, there are a few newcomers in the company. He suddenly said this. But after he said this, there was no more sound from the other side. He waited for a long time. Other than hearing her soft and shallow breathing, she didn't say a word. Chin Anlan's heart actually beat a little faster. He coughed lightly. I'm just joking. He was coaxing her, right? After he said this, he felt his heart beating even faster as he waited for her reaction. After a long time, she said, Up to you. After that, she hung up the phone. Qin Anlan looked at his phone. She was angry just like that. But he still called back shamelessly. She didn't pick up the first time. He called a few times. Chapter 1344. He replied seriously, "You should know what I want to do." What a rogue. Yi Liangqiu admitted that she blushed. She covered her face and tried to sound as cold as possible. "Aren't there a few newbies?" He coughed softly. "I have a wife and children now. Of course, I can't be casual anymore." "Yes, you still have Pei Chichi." She kept reminding him of the stupid things he did. Qin Anlan restrained himself and said gently, "Where is Mu Yun? I want to talk to him." Yi Liangqiu looked at Lin Xingyuan and little Mu Yun, and then cleared her throat. "He and Xingyuan are playing with building blocks. He may not have time to answer your call." Qin Anlan was mad. He was worried about them, but she was fine. Lin Xingyuan came to her as soon as he left. "Yi Liangqiu, don't forget your identity." He pretended to be cold and held the phone with his fingers. Then Yi Liangqiu said coldly, "I'm sorry, President Qin. I don't seem to be married." Qin Anlan's voice was deep, with unknown anger. "We have a child. Qin Anlan, I gave birth to him. It has nothing to do with you." She was probably confused because she was so angry that she spoke incoherently like him. "Without me, can you give birth to Mu Yun? With your fingers?" he asked shamelessly. Yi Liangqiu hung up the phone. As soon as she looked up, she saw Lin Xingyuan's thoughtful gaze. Her face was a little hot. "What are you looking at?" Lin Xingyuan smiled lightly. "Liangqiu, you seem to have put on weight recently." She touched her face and was a little doubtful. "Have I?" His gaze was deep, but what he didn't say was, "Liangqiu, do you know that even when you are quarreling with Qin Anlan, your whole body and face seem to be glowing, and your eyes will be particularly bright? At that time, you are the real you. You've always had him in your heart, but you just didn't want to admit it. Perhaps, this was something that I was unwilling to admit." Lin Xingyuan smiled lightly. "Yes, you've gained weight." He looked at her warmly. "Liangqiu, if you still like him, how about," he didn't say the rest, but she understood. Yi Liangqiu felt a little sad for Lin Xingyuan. Her fingers gently touched her neck, where Lin Xingyuan had given her the ring. She admitted that she was a coward. She did not dare to love anymore. She would rather live a peaceful life. Lin Xingyuan could give her peace. Lin Xingyuan looked at her dazed gaze and smiled bitterly. He walked over slowly and untied the necklace on her neck. He said lightly, "Liangqiu, I regret it. I should have given this to another girl. You have to understand the suffering of a doctor with a low income." Yi Liangqiu snatched it away. "Don't be like this, Lin Xingyuan." She put it on again childishly. "Since it's given to me, it's mine. He had a car accident." Lin Xingyuan looked at her and suddenly said. Yi Liangqiu looked up at him. "You might not have seen the news this afternoon." Lin Xingyuan smiled bitterly. "He can't come back because he's hospitalized." Yi Liangqiu stared at him for a few seconds and then searched on her phone. Sure enough, the entertainment headlines were the news of Qin Anlan being hospitalized. Concussion? She was stunned. Chapter 1345. Yi Liangqiu's eyes were still glued to the phone screen, and her grip on the phone was very tight. After a long while, she hugged little Mu Yun tightly. Lin Xingyuan took the child from her hands and said, "I'll take you to the airport." She was a little surprised. Lin Xingyuan smiled and said, "I've already booked the plane tickets." Yi Liangqiu looked straight at him and said softly after a long while, "Xingyuan, thank you." Lin Xingyuan held little Mu Yun with one hand and held her with the other. He was also full of boyfriend power. At night, as the car drove on the highway, he looked at the people behind from the rearview mirror. Little Mu Yun had already fallen asleep, and his little face was tilted on his mother's shoulder. Yi Liangqiu's gaze was looking out of the window, and no one knew what she was thinking. Lin Xingyuan's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his lips were pursed into a straight line. He drove all the way to the airport of H City. He bought some food for little Mu Yun and put it in the trunk of the car. Now, he brought it to Yi Liangqiu and said, "Give him some when he wakes up." Yi Liangqiu had a lot to say to him, but she couldn't say a word. Lin Xingyuan sighed and said, "Hurry up and go. Whether it's for Mu Yun or for yourself." "I'm doing it for Mu Yun." She looked at him and then lowered her head. It was rare for her to be like this. Lin Xingyuan smiled and said, "Liangqiu, when you lie, you don't even dare to look into people's eyes, do you know that?" "Ah!" She looked up at him immediately. Lin Xingyuan smiled again and reached out to rub Mu Yun's hair. "All right, hurry up and go. We'll reach B City soon." "Xingyuan." She called his name. He had already turned his back to her, but now he slowly turned his head back and smiled warmly. "Liangqiu, I'm still there. If you're unhappy in B City, then go back. Understand?" He reached out and touched her head, as gentle as a brother. "Go." He ordered himself to withdraw his hand, ordered himself to leave. He told himself that she still liked Qin Anlan, and Qin Anlan obviously liked her too. He loved Liangqiu not because he wanted her, but because he wanted her to be happy. Only Qin Anlan could give her happiness. It was late at night at the airport. People were coming and going in the departure lounge. Lin Xingyuan was getting further and further away. Yi Liangqiu raised her hand slightly, but then put it down again. Little Mu Yun looked at Lin Xingyuan's back in confusion, and asked in a daze, "Mummy, isn't Uncle Lin coming with us?" Yi Liangqiu didn't answer. She just hugged her son. "Let's go in." Shengyuan Hospital, B City. Late at night, an uninvited guest came to Qin Anlan's ward. It was Su Cheng. Su Cheng was carrying a backpack and dressed brightly. She asked her assistant to stand outside and walked in. She bent down and kissed Qin Anlan's face. Her voice was crisp and clear. "Anlan Ge." Qin Anlan opened his eyes and looked at Su Cheng. "It's you." He sat up and supported his forehead with his hand. "Why did you come so late?" Su Cheng sat on the small sofa beside his bed and played with her fingernails. "Daddy asked me to come and see you," he said. She kept him in suspense. Qin Anlan smiled lazily. Cheng, if you're smart, you should have married yourself long ago. There's no need to force yourself." Chapter 1346. Su Cheng peeled a fruit for herself. As she stuffed it into her mouth, she smiled and said, "I'm not getting married. I want to tie Anlan Ge down." "Anlan Ge, you don't even know how useful you are." Qin Anlan's face darkened. He looked at her for a while before smiling. "Is that so?" He paused. "Then why did you provoke Yi Zun in the past?" Su Cheng's expression changed. She looked at Qin Anlan and asked cautiously, "It's been so many years. Why are you suddenly asking about this?" Anlan Ge had never asked about it in the past. Was he suspecting something now? Qin Anlan smiled faintly. "You should know about my relationship with Yi Liangqiu. Yi Zun is her little brother, Cheng. Or do you think I shouldn't ask?" Su Cheng felt uneasy. She looked at Qin Anlan for a long time before saying softly, "Anlan Ge, have you fallen in love with her?" Cheng, I'm asking about you and Yi Zun," he answered her seriously. Su Cheng looked at him, her eyes widened, and there was a hint of hurt in them. However, Qin Anlan was unmoved. Because he was the best-looking guy at that time, Su Cheng started to throw a tantrum and raised her voice. "I like him, but I never thought that he would try to rape me." She lowered her head and played with her fingers, not saying a word. "Is that really the case?" Qin Anlan's voice was heavy. "Why did you humiliate him later on?" Su Cheng's voice was soft and filled with protest. "Anlan Ge, how could I remember such a long time ago?" She hugged his arm and acted coquettishly. Qin Anlan's eyes did not have a trace of warmth. He always felt that it was not that simple. He had only recently found out that Su Cheng was a lesbian. So, why did she express her affection for Yi Zun at that time? Shouldn't it be indifference? Pursing his thin lips, he looked at Su Cheng and was about to say something when the door was pushed open. He looked up and his gaze froze for a moment. Standing at the door was Yi Liangqiu. She held Mu Yun in her arms. Seeing Su Cheng holding Qin Anlan in her arms, Su Cheng's face was full of shyness. And now, it was late at night. Yi Liangqiu looked at him and Su Cheng and smiled faintly. It seemed that she had come at the wrong time, or rather, she should not have come. When he was about to leave, Su Cheng let go of Qin Anlan's arm and said sweetly, "Sister Liangqiu, you are here." She walked over and looked at Mu Yun in Yi Liangqiu's arms. Her voice was a little softer. "Is Mu Yun here too?" She turned around. "Anlan Ge, I'll leave first." She paused for a moment and said as if she wanted to see the world in chaos, "Stay a little longer, or my dad will catch you and discuss our marriage again." Qin Anlan's gaze fell on Yi Liangqiu's face, but his words were directed at Su Cheng. "Worry about yourself." Su Cheng smiled warmly. However, he left without any hesitation. After she left, Yi Liangqiu was still standing there. Qin Anlan frowned. "Isn't it tiring to hold Mu Yun like this?" Seeing that she didn't move, he simply lifted the quilt, walked over, carried little Mu Yun, and put him on his bed. He went into the bathroom to wash his face. He was a little annoyed after dealing with so many people for half a day. Yi Liangqiu followed in and looked at him up and down. "There seems to be nothing wrong with you," he grunted. "And I came at the wrong time. With a beauty as a companion, President Qin should be very comfortable living in this courtyard." Chapter 1347. She was dressed simply, but it couldn't hide her beauty. Moreover, it was rare for her to sulk at him, which made her look a little cute. Qin Anlan smiled, reached behind his back and pulled her over. She was a little embarrassed as she was placed in his arms. "Qin Anlan, what are you doing? I miss you a little." He hugged her with both hands, hugging her along with her arms in his embrace. He lowered his head and kissed her neck, lingering behind her ear. "Qin Anlan, this is a ward." Her voice was trembling. "Mu Yun is still outside." "Keep your voice down then," he said shamelessly as he unbuttoned her shirt one by one. He held her and began to tease her slowly. Yi Liangqiu bit her lip and said in a trembling voice, "Qin Anlan, let go of me." At this moment, he had already succeeded. He leaned on her back and nibbled on her neck. His voice was extremely hoarse. "You're the one who won't let go of me. Can you feel it?" He was shameless. Yi Liangqiu struggled with all her might, but she couldn't win against him in the end. Her body went limp. He reached out and picked her up, kissed her, and smiled like a spring breeze. No matter how fierce she was usually, she was as soft as water at this moment. His voice was low and hoarse. "Liangqiu, you miss me too, don't you?" "No." She gritted her teeth to prevent herself from making such a shameful sound, but he was deliberately torturing her until she completely let go of herself. And Qin Anlan seemed to have endured it for a long time. He did it 4 times in a row, not even bothering to change his position. In the end, he bit her delicate neck lazily and slowly. "Liangqiu, we're going back to City H tomorrow." Although his voice was lazy, there was a hint of command in it. Yi Liangqiu woke up and her body stiffened. "Are you afraid that I'll ruin your plans?" He was a little annoyed and ended it hastily. He leaned on her back and panted for a long time before saying softly, "The situation is unstable now. I feel more at ease with you and Mu Yun in City H." He scooped her up and carried her to the shower for a quick shower. At this moment, she was already limp and her body was still trembling on his shoulder. Qin Anlan couldn't help kissing her and smiled. "You're so useless." She came back to her senses. "I'm not here to have sex with you." "We didn't have sex." He picked her words. "Liangqiu, we just had sex." She reached out to hit him, but he dodged her and looked at her with a burning gaze. "Didn't you come because you were worried about me? You think too much." At this moment, she had regained her strength. She pushed him away and walked to the changing room to put on a bathrobe. Then she slowly turned back and looked at him. "Seeing you like this, I don't think I should have come. Is it because I'm not injured, or is it because of Su Cheng?" He leaned against the door, his gaze focused. "Because I'm not injured, or because of Su Cheng?" He leaned against the door, his gaze focused. He slowly walked over and lifted her chin. Is it because of Su Cheng? No. It was just that she answered too quickly, so it seemed like she was trying to hide something. He slowly walked over and lifted her chin. Is it because of Su Cheng? No. But she answered too quickly, so it seemed like she was trying to cover it up. He let go of her. You've been busy for a long time. Go to sleep. Chapter 1348. Qin Anlan looked at her and coughed. I'll coax him later. Right now, he really wanted to hug her to sleep. After so many years, he was a little tired. In the end, she was dragged to the bed by him. The poor little Mu Yun was carried to the sofa by the side. The big bed was occupied by the naughty father, and so was the mother, who was occupied by the father. Qin Anlan lay flat and watched Yi Liangqiu take the medicine. Then, he looked at what medicine it was and his face darkened. Why are you still taking this? Aren't you afraid of harming your body? He knocked the medicine away from her hand, but Yi Liangqiu picked it up and swallowed it again. Qin Anlan's face darkened as he looked at her. You've already given birth to one. Is there a difference between giving birth to two and one? Of course there is. Having one is young and ignorant, but having two is stupid. She looked a little bitter as she drank a mouthful of water. Qin Anlan's romantic thoughts were completely destroyed by her. He looked at her and said, You look stupid enough now. He lay down in a huff and turned his back to her. Yi Liangqiu also lay flat. Aren't you stupid? His back stiffened. He waited for a long time, but she didn't say anything. He turned his body and hugged her. He used his legs to hold her and his arms to hug her tightly. Yes, I'm very stupid now. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Qin Anlan, I can't afford to play your game. Then, what is it now? What did we do 4 times in the bathroom just now? Was it just your physical needs? He stared at her eyes and was a little aggressive. Yi Liangqiu asked, What about you? He held her cheek with one hand. Because I want you. She kicked him. Qin Anlan was a little more clear-headed now. He had lost control just now. He didn't want her to come, and he didn't want her to get involved. Tomorrow, he still wanted to send her away, so he pursed his lips. Tomorrow, I'll get Kaim to send you away. Her body was a little cold. Qin Anlan, in your heart, Mu Yun and I can only stay in City H, right? She said it tactfully, but the meaning was clear. Could it be that his spouse would never be her, Yi Liangqiu? Mu Yun would always be an illegitimate child. Qin Anlan looked at her. For now, it's better for you to stay in City H because you're going to marry Su Cheng, right? She wasn't completely clueless. Madame Qin's attitude and elder sister Ying's news. She had always known that the Su family and Qin family were preparing for a marriage alliance, but no one had expected Pei Chichi to appear in the middle. When she asked this, Qin Anlan sat up and lowered his head to look at her. Liang Qiu, if there's anything you want, you can just say it. I'll give you whatever I can. I don't want anything. Even if I want something, you can't give it to me. She smiled. Do you think I want marriage? No, I never want it. She sat up and looked at the night sky outside. What she wanted was respect. She didn't want to be ordered around like a kitten or a puppy. When he needed her, he could give her whatever he could. When he didn't want her, she had to leave. They were separated by the wall of a wealthy family. She couldn't walk in, and he didn't walk out for her. Such a relationship was too fragile. He looked at her. He knew that she didn't trust him, but he couldn't tell her so much now. He would rather she leave this troublesome place. For the first time, he wanted to protect her. Not for Mu Yun, but for her. Because she was his Yi Liangqiu. Chapter 1349. Downstairs of the hospital, Su Cheng was sitting in a white sports car. She leaned against the back of the seat and looked at the cigarette between her fingers. She was back. Su Cheng looked up and blew out a smoke ring. She was back. Sister Liangqiu, what can I do to you? Su Cheng said with a wicked tone as she pinched the cigarette. You forced me to do this. We could have coexisted in this world, But why did you appear again and again? Did you force me to do it again and again? That's not cute. Su Cheng smiled weirdly. She dialed a number and the call went through. It took a long time for someone to pick up. The voice on the other end sounded tired. What's up? Su Cheng narrowed her eyes and asked coldly, why is she in City B? Didn't you say that you would stay with her? The person on the other end of the line was silent for a moment before saying softly, she is an adult, and I think you know who she loves. I don't want to hear this. Su Cheng's voice was a little agitated and crazy. I just want to ask why you didn't stop her. Aren't you the best at using your deep love drama? After a long time, the person on the other end of the line said, if I were with her, would you let us go? Su Cheng laughed and giggled. How greedy. Isn't it enough that you have me? The person on the other end of the line hung up gently. Su Cheng was a little confused. Damn it, how dare he hang up on her? The phone slipped from her fingers and fell on the seat. Su Cheng laughed softly. Disobedient, right? There was only one outcome for disobedient people. And she couldn't let Yi Liangqiu stay. If she stayed, her dear parents would find out her little secret sooner or later, and this wasn't what she wanted. Sister Liangqiu, I'm sorry. You can't stay in City B, or it won't be fun. Su Cheng laughed crazily and started the car, late at night, in the Su family's mansion. Mr. Su hadn't slept yet. He was sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper as if he was waiting for her. Seeing Su Cheng enter, Mr. Su closed the newspaper in his hand and turned to look at his daughter. Cheng, how is Anlan? Su Cheng stuck out her tongue, dropped the bag in her hand, and came over to massage Mr. Su's shoulders. Her voice was a little coquettish. Dad, I'm going to be stupid. Are you stupid? Our Cheng doesn't want to get married, right? Mr. Su patted her hand and said, don't worry about it. Your mother and I will handle it for you. He paused for a moment. I heard that someone went to look for him today, is that right? Su Cheng turned around and sat on the sofa's armrest. She played with her delicate fingernails, showing her girlish demeanor. Dad, why are you still asking when you already know the answer? Mr. Su couldn't help but smile. How could you hide this kind of thing from Dad? You should have told me earlier and let me vent your anger for you. Su Cheng stuck out her tongue and said, I don't want to. Dad, don't listen to other people's nonsense. Anlan Ji has Pei Chichi in his heart. Yi Liangqiu is nothing to be afraid of. Mr. Su looked at her. Cheng, do you really think so? Su Cheng's eyes narrowed slightly. After a while, she said softly, of course, Dad. Is there a problem? Chapter 1350. A strange look appeared in Su Cheng's eyes. She forced a smile, looked at her father, and coughed lightly. Dad, can't I inherit ATV? Mr. Su glanced at her, his eyes full of love, and smiled. Dad can't bear for you to worry about it. He patted the back of Su Cheng's hand. All right, go to bed early. Didn't you always say that sleeping late is bad for your skin? Su Cheng still wanted to say something, but Mr. Su had already stood up and walked upstairs. She looked at his back and secretly clenched her teeth. This old thing was obviously guarding against her. He clearly didn't see her as his own daughter, and he even said that he was afraid she would be too tired. Did this old thing think she didn't know that they hadn't given up on finding their own daughter? They wanted her to become a sacrifice and marry Qin Anlan as cannon fodder so that their own daughter could inherit the family business. Then they had underestimated her. Not only did she find her daughter before them, but they were so close, and even her mother had seen Yi Liangqiu before, but she didn't recognize her. Instead, she thought that Yi Liangqiu was an indecent woman. Just thinking about it made her feel ironic. Su Cheng pursed her lips and slowly sat up. After so many years, she looked like a princess, but in fact, she wasn't even a substitute. At most, she was just a dog raised by the Su family. When the owner gave her some food, she had to wag her tail. How could she be willing to be a dog for the rest of her life? And that princess was Yi Liangqiu, the Yi Liangqiu that she didn't want to see the most. Mr. Su went upstairs. Mrs. Su had just finished showering and was sitting in front of the vanity mirror applying skincare products. Hearing Mr. Su's footsteps, she looked up. Cheng Cheng is back. Mr. Su nodded and sat on the bed, the mattress sinking deep into the ground. He looked at Mrs. Su and said lightly, "In the future, you should properly discipline Cheng Cheng. She is a girl, and she shouldn't be out running wild all day long. It doesn't make sense for her to come home in the middle of the night." Mrs. Su glanced at him. "Didn't you ask her to visit Anlan?" Mr. Su paused for a moment, then said, soft-hearted. His slightly cold attitude made Mrs. Su a little unhappy. She threw down the skincare products in her hands. Who was the one who wanted to carry Cheng Cheng back? Now, Su, do you think I don't know what you're thinking? Yes, biological children are naturally different. However, it has been so many years. If we could find her, we would have found her long ago. Why give up on Cheng Cheng for such a slim hope? After saying that, Mrs. Su could not stop herself from crying. Right now, you are pushing Cheng Cheng into a pit of fire. Mr. Su felt a little embarrassed and sat up all of a sudden. What are you talking about? You've seen Anlan grow up since he was a child. Although he is a bit romantic, he has not done anything wrong. Yes, that's because I didn't know what you were thinking before. It's different now. You have the ambition of a wolf. You're already so old, yet you're still thinking of schemes. Aren't you tired? Mrs. Su said angrily. Mr. Su looked at Mrs. Su with a solemn expression. Women should not interfere in men's affairs. Mrs. Su was not one to be trifled with. She snorted coldly. Then, don't even think about marrying Cheng Cheng to Qin Anlan. If you force her, I will take Cheng Cheng and run away from home. You. Mr. Su was furious. A woman's view. Chapter 1351. Mr. Su didn't want to argue with her, so he picked up his bathrobe and walked into the bathroom. But Mrs. Su obviously didn't want to let him go, so she followed him in. If she were our biological daughter, would you be willing to let her marry a jerk like Qin Anlan? Mr. Su wiped away the moisture on his face, squinted at his wife, and said in a suppressed voice, "Don't you miss her at all?" Mrs. Su's tears flowed down, and she gave Mr. Su a beating, crying as she hit him, "Why don't I miss her? I miss her even in my dreams, but what's the use of thinking about her? She can't be found." Mr. Su let his wife hit him, his eyes narrowed, as if thinking about something. He also felt a little guilty towards his wife. In this life, he had even schemed against his wife. And his daughter, the daughter that he missed dearly. Everything was in his hands, including Su Cheng, who was just an insignificant chess piece in his palm. After a long time, Mr. Su finally coaxed Mrs. Su. He had feelings for Mrs. Su, after all, she was his first wife. Moreover, he felt sorry for her, and also for their biological daughter. In the early morning at the hospital, Qin Anlan quietly got up and looked at Yi Liangqiu, who was sleeping soundly. He took away her medicine bottle, which contained birth control pills. He walked over to the nurse on duty at the pharmacy. "Open a bottle of vitamins for me." The nurse looked at him and smiled. "Mr. Qin, you probably haven't prescribed your own medicine, right? The doctors in the hospital prescribe it, but vitamins can be bought at the pharmacy, so there's no need to go through so much trouble." Qin Anlan nodded, and asked the nurse to buy similar vitamins for him. The nurse opened his medicine bottle, looked at it, and smiled even more happily. "Mr. Qin, there's no need for that. It's vitamin C, not birth control pills." Qin Anlan couldn't believe it. He looked at the nurse and asked, "Are you sure?" The nurse smiled. "Of course not, I take it every day. It can't be wrong." Qin Anlan clenched the medicine bottle in his hand, and didn't say anything. Yi Liangqiu was clearly taking vitamin C. Why did she tell him it was birth control pills? Then, there was only one reason: she wanted to get pregnant. Was she trying to trap him? Is that why you want to have another child? There was an indescribable feeling in Qin Anlan's heart. But what he was sure of was that there was one thing he urgently needed to do right now: divorce Chichi and put an end to this absurdity. When he returned to the ward, he didn't make a sound and put the bottle back. He called Kaim and asked him to send the documents he had prepared to Pei Chichi. However, only he and Kaim knew about this matter, because Pei Chichi and Tang Yu would be a good shield. No matter what Mr. Su did, he would not dare to touch Pei Chichi. After hanging up the phone, he sat back on the bed, pinched Yi Liangqiu's face, and said coldly, "Get up and make breakfast." Yi Liangqiu woke up, opened her eyes and looked at him for a while, then covered her head and went back to sleep. "Yi Liangqiu, I said I'm hungry." He lifted the quilt and said shamelessly in her ear, "I fed you last night, so shouldn't you feed me now?" She couldn't stand him, so she finally sat up and glanced at him. "I don't want to do it." He wasn't angry, but smiled lightly. "Then, let me know when you want to do it." Yi Liangqiu was angry, but what could she do to him? Chapter 1352. He knew how to cook. Yi Liangqiu was a little surprised, but he had already gone to the small kitchen. Soon, she could smell the aroma of seafood porridge. She ran over and saw that he was dividing the pot of porridge into small bowls and cooling them. Looking up and seeing her surprised expression, Qin Anlan chuckled. "This is Chichi's favorite food." She leaned against the door and said slowly, "Looks like your culinary skills have improved a lot in the past 2 years. Pausing for a moment, she asked harshly, "Qin Anlan, how is it? How does it feel to be a grandson?" He glanced at her. "I don't really know, but knowing that you're jealous makes me feel good." "I'm not." She sat down and took a sip, but he hit the back of her hand with his chopsticks. "You didn't brush your teeth or wash your face." The back of her hand immediately turned red. She looked up and glared at him. "What are you looking at?" He snorted. "Hurry up and go." Yi Liangqiu mumbled, "Old mama. I'm sure I'm a man. I think you should know better," he said shamelessly. There was a hidden meaning in his words. Yi Liangqiu looked at him and suddenly said, "When Mu Yun wakes up, we'll go back to City H." With that said, she walked towards the washroom. But she had only taken 2 steps when he caught her hand. "That's not what I meant." Qin Anlan's lips tightened. "I don't have any feelings for Su Cheng, and I won't marry her. You don't have to explain to me." Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little cold. "Explain it to Pei Chichi." He smiled and pulled her into his arms with a little force. His thin lips pressed against her ear. "Liangqiu, I've already sent the divorce papers." She was stunned and then she started to struggle. She had an inexplicable fear in her heart, but she didn't know what she was afraid of. Perhaps, from her heart, she did not want to hear his confession. This was not what she wanted. But how could he let her go? He held her in place and said in a hoarse voice, "Liangqiu, don't you want to know what I've been through all these years?" She shook her head violently. I don't want to at all. You have to know." His voice was a little low as he whispered in her ear, "I didn't plan to tell you, but you like to let your imagination run wild. I think if I don't tell you, you will dare to be with other men in H City. If that happens, I will go crazy, Liangqiu." As he spoke, he hugged her tightly. "Liangqiu, do you think I'm crazy?" She was completely stunned. She stared straight at him with tears in her eyes. "I admit that I thought I liked Chichi and that I loved her." His face was buried in her neck, as if he was trying his best to hide something. "Liangqiu, when I first saw her, you left me and went missing. That year, no one knew where you were, including Yingjie. At that time, when I saw Chichi, I felt that she was a dazzling new star. But I never thought that the reason why I paid so much attention to her was because she resembled you." He said a lot, more than what he usually said to her. "Liangqiu, if it wasn't for you, I think I would have fallen in love with her too. But after I fell in love with you, I fell in love with her only because of the comfort in my heart." This was a kind of replacement. Because he had lost something before, he subconsciously wanted to find something to make up for it. Chapter 1353. Yi Liangqiu lowered her head and looked at the person on her shoulder. She said faintly, "Did you suddenly wake up?" He didn't say anything. She chuckled and said, "But I don't believe a word of it." Qin Anlan, I can't believe you. No matter how hungry I am, I won't dare to eat a piece of meat that you throw at me. He pressed her shoulder and closed his eyes. It doesn't matter if you don't believe me. Because he had a lifetime to make her believe him. Yi Liangqiu's body was a little stiff. This was too much for her. Moreover, she didn't want to know. She was afraid that she wouldn't be willing to leave if she knew. Qin Anlan looked into her eyes and chuckled after a long time. Liangqiu, I don't think you'll leave without saying goodbye again, will you? Of course not. She pursed her lips. I'll leave in a while. Don't go. He grabbed her arm again. Liangqiu, don't go. She looked up and looked straight into his eyes. You're the one who asked me to go. He smiled bitterly. If others want to deal with me, so what if I go to City H? Liangqiu, stay. At least in City B, he could still protect her. Yi Liangqiu's eyes fell on his face for a long time before she said softly, Qin Anlan, are you sure? Yes. He held her in his arms and murmured, Liangqiu, stay with me. Now that he said it, he realized how lonely he had been and how much he had missed her all these years. Perhaps giving up on her was the stupidest thing he had ever done in his life, but he didn't want to admit it. Fortunately, she was still here. Fortunately, she gave birth to their child. Fortunately, when she left him, she loved him. They hugged each other, but they didn't notice that little Mu Yun had woken up. The little guy rubbed his eyes and ran over to hug Qin Anlan's leg. His voice was as soft as a little animal's. Daddy. Qin Anlan's heart was also incredibly soft. He picked up the little fellow and said, Mu Yun, are you hungry? Daddy will take you to brush your teeth. Yi Mu Yun said in a small voice, Daddy, are you hurt? Qin Anlan kissed his little face. Of course, Daddy has an indestructible body. If you don't believe me, you can ask Mommy. Little Mu Yun turned to look at his mother. Yi Liangqiu sneered, yeah, his skin is as thick as King Kong. I can't break it. Right. A gentle smile appeared on Qin Anlan's face as he looked at his son. See, Mommy already said yes. Could this person be any more thick-skinned? Yi Liangqiu didn't want to talk to him. She went to the ward to pack up her things. Qin Anlan took his son to brush his teeth and wash his face for breakfast. Little Mu Yun asked curiously, Daddy is not hurt. Why do you pretend? Qin Anlan sat and looked at his son's soft face. He pinched it. It felt good and he was satisfied. Then he smiled. Because when adults fight, sometimes it's hard to understand what's going on. Little Mu Yun didn't understand. Qin Anlan said in the simplest words, sometimes, you don't need to be too honest. Don't teach your son bad things. Yi Liangqiu's voice floated over. Qin Anlan looked at her and said, Yi Liangqiu, you are the least qualified to say this. Have you forgotten your dark history? What dark history do I have? She snorted. Chapter 1354. Little Mu Yun was a little gloomy. Daddy, are you talking about me? Also, when did Daddy bury him in Mommy's body? Did he sprout like a plant and grow up? Qin Anlan paused and coughed lightly. More or less. Yi Liangqiu looked at him. Qin Anlan, do you need me to tell Mu Yun about your dark past? His face darkened. The corner of Yi Liangqiu's mouth curled up. Qin Anlan couldn't help but take another look at her, and there was a hint of gentleness in his eyes. Little Mu Yun asked pitifully, is Daddy a little afraid of Mommy? Before Yi Liangqiu could say anything, Qin Anlan smiled lightly. Yes. Daddy was afraid that Mommy would be angry, so he gave in to her. A satisfied smile appeared on Xiao Muyun's usually cold and indifferent face. Qin Anlan reached out and rubbed his little head. I'll get a doctor I'm familiar with to examine you again later. However, he didn't expect that he would meet Pei Chichi and Tang Yu. Little Mu Yun also met Xiaoshan, his little milk bun. When little Mu Yun saw Xiaoshan, he felt that she was soft and fragrant, and her whole body seemed to exude a milky fragrance. She was like a little milk bun that had just come out of the steamer. If he bit her, she would definitely be fragrant and soft. Xiaoshan was so scared that she cried and hid in Tang Yu's arms proudly. After a while, she popped her fat little head out and looked at little Mu Yun. When she saw the look in little Mu Yun's eyes, she burst into tears again. Little big brother wanted to eat her up. Tang Yu coaxed her for a long time before she finally calmed down. However, her little heart would never turn back again. Instead, it faced this way and refused to come out again. Qin Anlan looked at Tang Yu holding his daughter and felt a little envious. He thought that if he and Liangqiu had a daughter, she would definitely be very cute and cute. It wasn't that he didn't love Mu Yun, but as a father, he liked his younger daughter more. With that thought in mind, his gaze shifted to Yi Liangqiu. His gaze moved down and naturally landed on her lower abdomen. He hadn't used any protection these days, and the so-called contraceptive pill she was taking was a vitamin. Maybe she was pregnant. He had to remember to be gentle the next time they had sex. Perhaps because his gaze was too passionate, Tang Yu clearly saw the meaning in his eyes. Amused, Zhong Shen sighed. Qin Anlan looked like a smart person, but he was actually mentally retarded when it came to relationships. However, his face revealed a faint smile, saying in an extremely magnanimous manner, "Anlan, I owe you a favor." The weight of these words was very heavy. Qin Anlan could ask him to return the favor at any time. Qin Anlan's gaze fell on Pei Chichi. She was the same. Their eyes met. The intimacy they once had could only turn into a greeting. It could only be a greeting. He smiled and said, "Okay." From the beginning to the end, Yi Liangqiu and Pei Chichi's gazes only met lightly, and there wasn't much uneasiness. If something really happened between Pei Chichi and Qin Anlan, then they would meet again. When they left, only Xiaoshan and little Mu Yun would miss each other. They had nothing else to do with each other. That preposterous scene was now over. And Tang Yu, out of protection for Qin Anlan and Pei Chichi, used some means to erase that marriage in New York. Chapter 1355. Qin Anlan was flipping through the documents. When he heard her words, he did not raise his head and merely asked indifferently, "What do you mean?" "The feeling of seeing my ex-wife." She pursed her lips and harumphed coldly. He finally raised his head and looked at her. After a long while, he smiled. "Jealous?" "No." Her voice was a little childish. Qin Anlan continued to read the documents and said casually, "Liangqiu, there's actually no need for that. For example, food. If there's something that you want to eat but can't eat it, after a long time, your appetite won't be as good, let alone reminiscing about it. Shameless." She glared at him and decided not to talk about this topic anymore. However, his interest seemed to be piqued as he walked to her and bent down to look at her. It's not like some things that you can't forget once you've eaten them and want to eat them again and again. Yi Liangqiu's face blushed as she glared at him. "You're talking nonsense. You know very well whether I'm talking nonsense or not. Liangqiu, don't you miss it?" He did not make things difficult for her, partly because he was busy. He straightened his body and pinched her face before leaving. To his surprise, he found that her touch was no worse than Mu Yun's. After his parents flirted, he did not expect that little Mu Yun would learn from them as well. Food. He couldn't forget it after eating it. No wonder he felt that his little heart was like a milk bun. So, that was the case. So, it could be eaten. Daddy ate Mummy. Little Mu Yun was initially feeling a little ashamed. But now, he felt that it couldn't be any more normal. He made up his mind that when that little milk bun grew up, he would eat her up. Qin Anlan stayed in the hospital for about a week. During this week, Su Cheng came over once more. It was nothing much and she just sat down. Yi Liangqiu did not meet with her and avoided her. She still couldn't forget how Yi Zun died. In the past few years, Mu Yun was unexpectedly born. Mu Yun's health wasn't good. Yi Zun's death could only be a hurdle in her heart. It was impossible for her to skip over Mu Yun to take revenge, but it didn't mean that she had forgotten. After sending off Su Cheng, Qin Anlan saw her coming out with a dark expression. He wanted to tease her, but he didn't say anything in the end. She hadn't forgotten, and neither had he. Next week, ATV and King Entertainment will jointly hold a star ceremony. Come with me then. He paused for a moment. King Entertainment and ATV have reached a consensus that there will be a lot of cooperation in the next 3 years. However, Yi Liangqiu was focused on another question. She looked at him and asked calmly, "Is it your personal identity, or your identity as a female artist from King Entertainment?" She was a little puzzled. Originally, Qin Anlan had wanted her to make a comeback, but after so many days, he hadn't mentioned this matter. She wanted to ask, but she didn't have such a plan, so it wasn't appropriate for her to ask. At this moment, Qin Anlan looked at her and smiled. "Of course it's as a female artist. Liangqiu, it's not time for our relationship to be made public yet." "Relationship? What relationship do I have with you?" Yi Liangqiu snorted coldly. "Don't be so shameless." Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes. "No." He reached out and pulled her to the sofa, trapping one hand in his arms. Yi Liangqiu bit her lip. "Mu Yun is here." He lowered his head and kissed her lips, murmuring, "He's asleep." Chapter 1356. She panted a little and put her hands in front of her. "No." Qin Anlan. Her voice was soft and contained a hint of depression. Qin Anlan's lips moved to her ear. "Go to the bathroom, okay?" She was really shy and had been teased by him like this, so she leaned on his shoulder and nodded slightly. So Qin Anlan, who was in the hospital, picked her up and carried her straight to the bathroom. As soon as the door was closed, he couldn't wait to kiss her lips. Their lips and teeth tangled, and their clothes fell to the ground. She was pressed against the cold wall, and his hot body was in front of her. Although he was eager, he was not in a hurry to take her. He kissed her and forced her. "Liangqiu, do you really want me?" She shook her head, and her expression was a little crazy. Qin Anlan reached out to pinch her cheeks and leaned forward to kiss her deeply. In the hopeless entanglement, his voice was sent into her mouth and crushed into pieces. "Liangqiu, you said you want me." She opened her eyes and then bit his neck. His gaze became deeper, and he took her in an instant. However, for some reason, perhaps because she was too excited or too nervous, her cooperation was a mess. She was in pain, and so was he. Amidst the chaos, she bit his neck. "Qin Anlan, don't you know how to read countless people?" He lowered his head and looked at the woman in his arms. It was as if he had gone back to many years ago, when she was still a little girl. She was in pain, but she didn't dare to say it. She could only grit her teeth and bear it. At that time, he thought that her face would look good on the big screen. But now, he felt that she belonged to him alone, and no one else was allowed to see it. So he kissed the corner of her mouth and said meaningfully, "That was a long time ago." However, he tried to be as gentle as possible. He kissed her again and again, and finally carried her into the bathtub. This was the best time for them. Their soul and body became one, and that was probably it. After Qin Anlan was discharged from the hospital, Yi Liangqiu and little Mu Yun moved directly into his apartment. He was very busy, but he still found time to accompany the mother and son. Madame Qin didn't approve of this, but Qin Anlan still insisted on going his own way. Especially when Lady Qin found out that Qin Anlan's female companion was Yi Liangqiu on the day of the starlight ceremony, she disapproved of it even more. She personally went to the headquarters of King Entertainment. Qin Anlan came back from a meeting and saw his mother. He smiled and said, "Mom, why are you here? If I didn't come, you would have probably forgotten your surname." Lady Qin's tone was a little harsh. "Anlan, you're too muddle-headed. You clearly know that ATV is eyeing King Entertainment. Why do you want Yi Liangqiu to be stuck in the middle? Don't you know that marrying Su Cheng is the best thing for us? You can use her to confuse Mr. Su's sight." "Anlan, I don't believe you didn't think of it." Of course, Qin Anlan thought of it, but he didn't want to do it. Without Liangqiu, he might, but now, he wouldn't hurt Liangqiu. Liangqiu would misunderstand and she would run away again. He had been lonely and empty for so long. He didn't want to lose her again. Lady Qin's eyes lit up. Why, do you want to marry her? Is there something wrong with that? Qin Anlan poured himself a glass of wine, but he didn't drink it. He remembered that he and Yi Liangqiu didn't really use contraception, so he didn't drink. And Lady Qin also realized that her son had changed. Anlan's lifestyle hadn't been this good in the past. Chapter 1357. As for why Qin Anlan had changed, Lady Qin knew very well in her heart. It was probably because of Yi Liangqiu. Thinking of this, she felt that Yi Liangqiu wasn't completely useless. At least in terms of temperament, although she was cold, she was indeed steadier than Su Cheng. From this point of view, Yi Liangqiu was obviously more suitable for Anlan, and Anlan also liked her. But what Lady Qin didn't like was Yi Liangqiu's family background. It was fine if she came from a small family, but it was also a broken one. She looked at Qin Anlan and pursed her lips. Anlan, do you know her family and her past? Qin Anlan said lightly, that's not important. That's very important. Lady Qin said seriously, her mother had been living in a mental hospital before she died. Su Xiu went to investigate. 2 years before that woman died, Yi Liangqiu didn't go to see her. Think about it, how cruel is her heart? Lady Qin thought about it and felt a little cold. She treated her own mother like this. Anlan, do you think her heart is made of iron? She didn't want Anlan to walk the same path as her. She didn't want Anlan to be lost because he liked a woman too much. At least, she wanted to see how much Yi Liangqiu cared about Anlan. But she didn't. Yi Liangqiu obviously didn't care much about Anlan. In her eyes, there was only her son. Qin Anlan played with the wine glass in his hand. After a long time, he gently put it on the table. I let her down first, Mom. You don't have to say any more. I want to marry her. He had a premonition that in the near future, Mr. Su and his mother would definitely think of a way for him to marry Su Cheng. Their goal was to bring each other down, and he was no longer willing to sacrifice the person he liked for his own benefit. With that, he stood up. Mom, I still have a meeting to attend. Let's have lunch together at noon. If you're free at night, you can come back with me. Liangqiu is a good cook. His tone was exactly the tone of a son who had a family. Lady Qin was amused and annoyed at the same time. Finally, when he left, she sighed and said, he has grown up. Crispy Sleeve laughed along, old mistress forgot, young master is already in his 30s. Early 30s. Lady Qin murmured, Su Xiu, Anlan is in his early 30s, and I'm not even 60, but you're already calling me old lady. Am I really old? She looked at Lady Qin and hurriedly said, Pooh pooh pooh, old madam doesn't like to be called that. I won't call her that in the future. Lady Qin waved her hand. Forget it. Let's just call him that. She stood up. I don't want to eat lunch, let alone dinner. Crispy Sleeve supported her. That's good too. Young people have different tastes. It's good to eat separately. As she said that, she tried to sound her out. Old madam can meet in the future. There's no rush. Lady Qin turned her head and looked at her. You. Do you think I don't know that you're feeling sorry for that ingrate and trying to get information out of me? Crispy Sleeve laughed. How could I? Who would dare to get information out of old madam? Lady Qin sighed. I know you all think that I'm unreasonable, but Su Xiu, I just want to give the best to Anlan. As for Yi Liangqiu, it was hard to tell how much she loved Anlan. This was what she was most dissatisfied with. Crispy Sleeve nodded and coaxed, Old madam, what young master likes is the best, don't you think so? If he didn't like something, no matter how good it was, it would be useless to young master. Instead, it would be an eyesore. Crispy Sleeve comforted her gently. And young master will have a way to deal with the Su family. Don't worry, old madam. Chapter 1358. Soon, it was Friday. At 8:30 p.m., the sky darkened. The Starlight Gala charity night jointly organized by ATV and King Entertainment had arrived. The gala was held in B City's State Hall. It was a grand occasion. Half of the stars in the entertainment industry had arrived. The reporters were dressed to the nines and waiting on both sides of the red carpet. They were especially excited because tonight was Yi Liangqiu's comeback night. The first car slowly drove up the red carpet. The car door opened. It was ATV's president, Mr. Su, and his daughter, Su Cheng. Su Cheng was petite and wore a chiffon skirt. She had an exquisite figure and her hair was not combed neatly. Instead, it was pulled back in a lazy bun. She looked pure and sexy. The reporters rushed forward to take photos. Su Cheng stuck to Mr. Su like a little bird and struck a few poses to satisfy them. The reporters were most interested in ATV and King Entertainment's movements. They asked directly, "President Su, there are rumors that King Entertainment President Qin and Miss Su Cheng are getting married. What do you think?" Mr. Su chuckled. "I usually don't get involved in the affairs of young people." He paused. "Our family is very democratic. Everything is based on Cheng Cheng's wishes." The reporters aimed their microphones at Su Cheng. Su Cheng smiled sweetly. "I think women can't take the initiative in such matters. Everything depends on Anlan Ji's attitude." The words Anlan Ji had already explained Su Cheng's attitude. The reporters were as excited as sharks smelling blood. At this moment of excitement, the second car arrived. As usual, it would be King Entertainment President Qin's car. The reporters swarmed forward and aimed their microphones at Qin Anlan. "President Qin, why didn't you come with Miss Su Cheng?" Qin Anlan stood still and curled his lips. "Are you questioning me?" The reporters were stunned by his powerful aura. They were at a loss for words and couldn't continue. Qin Anlan ignored him. He reached out to hold the door and let the people in the car get out. Yi Liangqiu got out of the car in a black dress. Her shoulders deepened into a V shape, her waist was tucked in, and the hem of her skirt was spread out. She even had a high split at the base of her thighs. Her slender and fair legs were extremely beautiful, especially when she stood beside Qin Anlan, who was 186 centimeters in height. They were a perfect match. Yi Liangqiu was an international best actress, so naturally, she had her own aura. Moreover, the media discovered that her skin did not show any signs of aging even though she had been out of the entertainment industry for more than 2 years. Instead, it had become fairer and more translucent, so fair that it was almost glowing. The reporters took photos like crazy, and all the questions surrounded Yi Liangqiu. "Miss Yi, tonight is the night of your comeback, so what are your plans next?" "Plans?" Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly and looked up at Qin Anlan. "You have to ask our President Qin." There was a touch of intimacy in her tone. If it was an ordinary person, they probably wouldn't be able to tell, but these reporters were all man-eating sharks. Their noses were sharper than dogs. How could they not tell? They were all excited all of a sudden. After all, Qin Anlan had a scandal with the little princess of ATV before, and now he was suddenly with Yi Liangqiu. Looking closely, there was a small secret between them. The handbag in Yi Liangqiu's hand was silver, and Qin Anlan's tie was also silver. If they were just artists from the company, they wouldn't give people the illusion that they were a couple. Qin Anlan smiled faintly. "It depends on Miss Yi's physical condition." Chapter 1359. He said it vaguely, but the reporters could hear it clearly. This was probably preparing for pregnancy. One of the reporters coughed. "What is the relationship between President Qin and Miss Yi now?" "Employment relationship. Relationship between a man and a woman." Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlan spoke at the same time. After that, Yi Liangqiu glared at him. He smiled. "Liangqiu, don't you think we should make our relationship public?" Qin Anlan understood that in such an occasion, the Su family or his mother would find a way to force him and Su Cheng to be together. If that was the case, he might as well make his relationship with Yi Liangqiu public. That way, she wouldn't be able to run away. He could still guess what she was planning. After he said that, Yi Liangqiu was stunned. She looked up at him, not daring to believe what he had said. This bastard, he had clearly said that she would only accompany him as a celebrity. How did it become like this? Her stunned look was a little funny and also a little cute. Qin Anlan lowered his head and kissed her lips. In just 2 seconds, he left. However, she was even more shocked because there was a ring on her finger. She looked up and was stunned. That ring was the only one from the Zurich family. Because it was a rare 5-carat yellow diamond and it was in the shape of a crown, it was called Queen. And he put the Queen's ring on her finger. Yi Liangqiu didn't come back to her senses for a long time. She didn't know what he meant. Because, it was too strange. Do you like it? He smiled, held her hand and said to the reporters generously, Yi Liangqiu, my future wife. Mr. Su and Su Cheng were stunned. They didn't expect that Qin Anlan would confirm Yi Liangqiu's identity under such circumstances when the situation wasn't stable. Does he not know that this will not do him any good? Mr. Su's eyes were inscrutable, and Su Cheng couldn't help but say, Anlan Ge, it's okay to spread rumors. But if you're serious, aren't you committing bigamy? No, she had to stop him. So she ignored Mr. Su's hint and brought up Pei Chichi. The reporters were in an uproar. Qin Anlan looked at Su Cheng. Of course, he knew that he would make the Su family unhappy today. He could understand Mr. Su, but Su Cheng. He was sure that Su Cheng didn't like him, so why did she deliberately target him? Now was not the time to think about this. Qin Anlan had to think about Yi Liangqiu the most. However, he cared about her in his heart. This little ingrate might not think the same way about him. Yi Liangqiu gently stroked the ring with her fingers and smiled coldly. President Qin, so you have a wife. She wanted to take off the ring, but he stopped her. He held her hand in his and looked at her sternly. Yi Liangqiu, I dare you to take it off. She was shocked by him and didn't move for a long time. Qin Anlan smiled faintly. He actually pinched her cheek. This kind of action was a little intimate, not too suitable for this kind of situation. However, when he did it now, there wasn't the slightest bit of disrespect, only a deep feeling of doting. All the female reporters on the scene were touched by the sweetness. They kept taking photos, and their eyes were a little hot. This was what love should be like. A person like President Qin was now looking at Yi Liangqiu with watery eyes. Chapter 1360. Qin Anlan raised his hand and took out a pair of killer pliers. Miss Yi and my child is already 7 years old, so we will get married as soon as possible. The child is already 7 years old? The reporters were going crazy. All these years of paparazzi work had been in vain. The male lead was the head of King Entertainment, and the female lead was the heavenly queen of King Entertainment. These two actually had a child, and they hid it so well, but the poor little princess of ATV had been cannon fodder for so many years. After Qin Anlan said that, Yi Liangqiu stepped on his foot. She wanted to say something, wanted to deny it, but Qin Anlan bent down and kissed her. This time, it was a deep French kiss. He held her face in his palms, and his lips were glued to hers. He crushed the words she wanted to say, and then swallowed them into his stomach. This kiss was very hot. At first, it was pleasing to the eyes, but later on, the female reporter was too embarrassed to watch. Because the kiss was too deep. It was *****. Qin Anlan used up all his lung capacity and let go of her. Yi Liangqiu didn't have the temperament of a queen anymore. Her whole body was soft, and if it wasn't for him holding her up, she would have fallen. If you dare to say no, I will take you right now. His lips whispered against hers. To outsiders, it looked very lingering, but only she knew how shameless he was. Yi Liangqiu raised her head and glared at him. Qin Anlan smiled. And Mr. Su walked over with Su Cheng, smiling faintly as they gave their blessings. Mr. Su didn't seem to be forcing himself, but Su Cheng's eyes were a little red. She looked at Qin Anlan with a sorrowful gaze, which made people think of a love triangle. However, Qin Anlan only treated Su Cheng as heir. He was also the best actor. He rubbed Su Cheng's hair and said, "Little girl, what's wrong? Are you still reluctant to part with me after being my shield for so many years?" Not to mention Mr. Su and Su Cheng, even Yi Liangqiu was shocked by Qin Anlan's words. With just one sentence, he had cleanly absolved himself of all responsibility. He was really the best actor. Even Yi Liangqiu had to admit that she was inferior to him. Then, there was some drama. The four of them stood together to be photographed. Even though Su Cheng was leaning against Qin Anlan pulled Yi Liangqiu to his side. Their fingers were tightly intertwined, and the father and daughter next to them became a watchboard. This photo also became a headline, "Qin Anlan's hand never let go." Yi Liangqiu went from being the queen of music to being Mrs. Qin. All the celebrities came one after another, but no matter how big the superstars were, they couldn't suppress the explosive news today. Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu were on the hot search list at the fastest speed. Even Yi Muyun's identity was exposed. The ceremony began. Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlan sat side by side. She said in a low voice, "Why did you do this? Is it not good?" He looked at the MC lightly and smiled. "Or do you want to see me marry Su Cheng? There is no relationship between the two." She was a little annoyed. His fingers grabbed her hand and held her firmly in his. He said in a low voice, "Even if you don't marry her, it will probably take a long time. Liangqiu, I'm a little tired. I don't want to continue like this." He played the man's trick to the extreme. But she actually didn't hear it and looked up at him. Chapter 1361. The scale of tonight's ceremony was huge. Celebrities from all walks of life were invited to the stage by the MC to donate. Su Cheng had donated 10 million yuan, which was considered a huge sum. When she got off the stage, she looked at Yi Liangqiu provocatively. Yi Liangqiu smiled and lifted the hem of her dress to go up the stage. She was considered the finale. She reached out and took the microphone from the MC. "Well, I think everyone knows that I've been out of the entertainment industry for the past few years. So I think President Qin should express his gratitude for my help this time." Her gaze fell on Qin Anlan. "I wonder if President Qin has any objections?" The MC immediately rushed down and moved closer to the microphone. "Our Empress Yi just showered us with dog food. What do you think, President Qin?" The MC asked as she incited everyone present. "President Qin, how about 20 million yuan for a kiss from the beauty?" Everyone was excited at once and they were all clamoring for a kiss. Qin Anlan stood up and looked at Yi Liangqiu. "What do you think, Ms. Yi?" Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. "Forget about the kiss. We can have a dance." Qin Anlan leaned sideways and said a few words to the MC. The MC immediately understood and smiled excitedly. "Ms. Yi has auctioned the first dance tonight. President Qin will donate 20 million yuan in Ms. Yi's name." He walked in front of the pianist and said something. The stage darkened and only a beam of light shone on Yi Liangqiu. She stood there alone, lonely and beautiful. It was quiet all around. Everyone could hear the song. It was called Waiting. Qin Anlan walked slowly towards Yi Liangqiu. He walked to her side step by step and lowered his head. "Do you remember, Liangqiu? This was the song we played when we danced for the first time." She looked up at him and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you remember?" He nodded, put his arm around her waist and gently put her on his shoulder. The music was gentle and his gaze was even more gentle. Suddenly, she rested her face on his shoulder, not daring to look at his eyes. Because she was afraid that if she saw it, she would not bear to leave. Having her heart broken once was enough. Yes, she did not want to be with him forever. She wanted to get pregnant and leave him. From now on, she would never appear in front of him again. He held her in his arms and turned around gently. He smiled faintly. "Liangqiu, you're scared, huh?" "I didn't." She buried her face in his shoulder and said in a low voice, "No, you're still trembling." He smiled and pulled her into his arms. He hugged her tightly enough to protect her. They were in public, so Yi Liangqiu was a little shy. Qin Anlan, people will laugh. Then let them laugh. He straightened her face and looked at her with his dark eyes. His footsteps had already stopped. He held her face in his hands and looked at her intently. Everything around them had disappeared. It was as if they were the only two people left in the world. She raised her head and looked at him helplessly. Her breathing started to become erratic and unstable. She called out to Qin Anlan softly, and her voice was already trembling a little. He grunted vaguely and finally leaned forward to kiss her lips. Heaven and earth, everything calmed down. Only eternity was left. At this moment, he actually wanted to cry. His voice was low and hoarse. Liangqiu, I feel that I've never liked someone so much before. It was not infatuation, nor was it impulsive. It was nostalgia. Nostalgia for everything that they used to have. Chapter 1362. Yi Liangqiu's body didn't move. She let him hug and kiss her, but she didn't respond. He seemed to be unwilling to give up. Their lips rubbed against each other more intensely. Only then did she retreat a little. I'm not interested in performing. This is not a performance. I can't help it. He laughed and finally let go of her. However, he kept holding her hand. Tonight was enjoyable. He wanted to send her off the stage. However, he had only taken 2 steps when the chandelier above suddenly made a crisp and fragile sound. He looked up and saw that the crystal chandelier was on the verge of falling. It happened to be right above Yi Liangqiu. He exerted a little force and pulled her into his arms. The two of them fell to the ground together. Then there was a loud sound. The crystal chandelier directly hit Qin Anlan's waist. The sharp crystal pierced his skin, and the chandelier smashed into him, causing him to let out a muffled groan. However, he had been holding Yi Liangqiu in his arms the whole time. He hugged her carefully as if he was holding a treasure. At this moment, everyone believed that his love for her was true. That was because human instincts could not be deceived. Qin Anlan lay there for a long time before he moved. His palm was placed on Yi Liangqiu's lower abdomen. He was afraid that she was pregnant. Liangqiu, are you okay? His face rested on her neck. His voice was unbelievably hoarse and a little weak. At this moment, everyone around them let out a scream. God, it was too scary. Su Cheng was the first to run over. She knelt in front of them and touched Yi Liangqiu with a trembling finger. Sister Liangqiu, are you okay? A light flashed across Qin Anlan's eyes. He was covered in blood, but Su Cheng didn't care. Instead, she asked if Liangqiu was okay. What kind of feelings did Su Cheng have for Liangqiu? Qin Anlan closed his eyes and recalled his attitude towards Shen Lian when he was young. The more he liked her, the more he didn't want to talk to her and the more he pretended to hate her. Su Cheng, is it the same? Before he could think too much, Mr. Su had also come over and pulled Su Cheng up. Then, he looked at Qin Anlan and said, she seems to have fainted. Anlan, can you move? Qin Anlan had never been so embarrassed. He gritted his teeth and said, maybe not. Mr. Su pursed his lips and called the staff to bring a stretcher to carry Qin Anlan on it. After that, he carried Yi Liangqiu in his arms. Find a room for her and call a doctor over. Mr. Su's reaction made Qin Anlan's eyes narrow. Although it was painful, his brain had not rusted yet. There's no need. Let her go to the hospital with my ambulance. Qin Anlan had other plans in mind. It would be best if Liangqiu could go to the hospital for a checkup. Moreover, he didn't feel safe leaving her here. Mr. Su hesitated for a moment and said, that's fine too. Because the injured person was a celebrity, the ambulance and the police arrived very quickly. The scene was secured and Qin Anlan and the unconscious Yi Liangqiu were sent to Shengyuan Hospital. He didn't dare to sleep. He couldn't sleep under such circumstances. He had to protect her. Kaim went to the scene immediately and got the news that it was an accident. When he arrived at the hospital, Qin Anlan could only lie on his stomach after the doctor removed the shrapnel from his back. He didn't use anesthesia because he had a lot of things to do. Make some arrangements at the police station. Don't make any conclusions, just say that it was man-made. We need to find the real culprit. Qin Anlan's eyes were deep. He pursed his lips and said calmly, I want to see what Mr. Su and Su Cheng are thinking. Chapter 1363. Kaim nodded. I understand, President Qin. Qin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu, who was still unconscious, and pursed his lips. Don't let her know. Kaim's eyes were a little complicated. It seemed that President Qin was serious. After saying this, Qin Anlan was also a little sleepy. He propped himself up and said, let's waste some more time. We don't have to do it ourselves. I think Mr. Su and Su Cheng will bite each other. It will be a good show then. After Kaim left, Qin Anlan lay on his stomach and looked at Yi Liangqiu, who was lying on the bed. The doctor had already checked her, and there was nothing wrong with her. She just fainted from fear. I thought you were more daring than I thought. Useless little thing. As he spoke, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He took his phone and dialed the number of his mother's house. It was Su Xiu. Aunt Su, Liangqiu, and I had a small accident. We're in the hospital now. Go to the apartment and pick up Mu Yun. Don't let my mother know for the time being, Qin Anlan said softly. He had his own considerations. His mother didn't like Liangqiu very much. If she knew that he was injured to save Liangqiu, she might dislike him even more. Su Xiu was also a little surprised, but hearing that there was nothing wrong with his tone, she immediately went to do it. With nothing to worry about, Qin Anlan fell into a deep sleep. His hand crossed the middle of the bed and held her hand. Liangqiu, I don't want to let go of your hand again. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Yi Liangqiu woke up in the middle of the night. Before she opened her eyes, she smelled disinfectant. She slowly opened her eyes and looked around at Bai Susu. She knew that she was in the hospital. She moved a little and didn't feel any discomfort. She only felt a little dizzy and hungry. Her hand was held by someone. She looked over and saw Qin Anlan. He was sprawled on the bed with his face tilted towards her, sleeping soundly. Perhaps it was because of sleep, but his face looked much calmer and younger than usual. She recalled how he had pounced on her and held her in his arms. Her heart wavered. She gently broke free from his hand and gently placed it on his face, caressing his facial features. How do you feel? His deep voice rang out. She jerked her hand back and tried to leave, but he caught it. He grabbed her hand and half forced her to wander on his face. His voice was also a little soft. Liangqiu, are you worried about me? President Qin, you think very highly of yourself. Her voice was deliberately cold. He just looked at her, and after a while he laughed softly. Is that so? Then why wasn't the first thing you did when you woke up to escape? Why didn't you take off the ring? Her face was a little hot, and she stared at him for a long time without saying anything. Qin Anlan smiled. Liangqiu, it's not embarrassing to be worried about me. His gaze was a little warm and a little regretful. She wasn't pregnant. He had hoped that she would be pregnant so that she wouldn't be able to run away. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes and after a while, she bit her lip. Are you hungry? Qin Anlan smiled. I want to eat you more. Don't go too far. She glared at him. Qin Anlan laughed. He looked at her for a while before he chuckled. I probably don't have the stamina for that now. Liangqiu, don't work too hard. You can eat tomorrow morning. He had seen her get off the bed and hurriedly stopped her.